everybody. I'm Barbara, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about my journey, my career journey from engineer to leader to manager. Somewhere along that way, I encountered a little dilemma. I had achieved the career progression, I had the title, but now what? And a bit of uncertainty hit me as to whether the path that I had chosen for myself was in fact still the right one for me. So today I will be sharing how I navigated that uncertainty, and I'll finish off with some practical tips that you can try out to see whether it helps you figure out what the next logical step might be for your career. So by now you probably have heard I'm originally from Germany. I moved to New Zealand and I did a computer science degree down at Canberra University in Christchurch before moving to Wellington and starting my tech career. I started off working for a big management consultancy called Accenture, and then worked for all of these fabulous places over a period of around about 25 years. And I had all kinds of different roles. I started off as an engineer, went to senior engineer, became a technical lead in all kinds of different versions and flavors before becoming an engineering manager and a manager of engineering leads. So you could say I did the classical career ladder, right? It wasn't quite like that for me. It wasn't as deliberate. In fact, I resisted in the beginning for quite a long time to move up that ladder. I remember a manager, maybe after 5 years of being a senior developer, trying to get me to become a project manager. And I resisted because that wasn't really the right time or the right thing for me to do. But eventually I got curious, so I did become a manager in the end. That ladder looked pretty one way for a long period of time for me. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about engineer roles and what I call the individual contributor myth. Now, individual contributor is a term that's commonly used to distinguish between a person who is a manager in a manager role, who has people report to her, and that person is now responsible not just for her own work and goals, but also for the other people's work. And an individual contributor supposedly is a person like an engineer or a tester or often a business analyst who doesn't have any direct reports and therefore only contributes individually. Now, I've discovered for myself that that is a myth. In my opinion, the best engineers are those ones that have discovered early that software development is a team sport. It's a team sport, and you are seeking synergy with other people. So you're collaborating deliberately with many people to put all of your clever brains together to achieve an outcome much better and much bigger than what you could achieve as an individual. I'm sure you've encountered examples like this. You might have had to coach a junior developer. You want to, of course, make sure that they can get productive as fast as possible. But at the same time, you have to show empathy and not overwhelm them so that they run for the hills. Or you might have had to defend a design. So you've been tasked to do a technical design, say for a new microservice. You then have to present that to your team and bring them along on the journey. You might have to defend it against the odd architect who thinks you should be doing an event stream, while you think, well, it's such a small scope, maybe just a synchronous API will suffice. So you're constantly negotiating. You may or may not have the luxury of having a Scrum Master in your team. So here you find yourself taking turns being a Scrum Master. And what are you doing? You're planning. You're becoming responsible for your team's delivery for a sprint, and you're facilitating. So all of these are clear leadership skills. You're leading. You may lead without authority, but you are still leading, and you are directly influencing the performance of the people around you. technical problems. Okay, so eventually I became an engineering manager. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about what that felt like to me. As an engineering manager, you face bigger challenges than you faced before. So one that I clearly remember was I was an engineering manager at the BNZ. And at the time, there were approximately 1,000 people working in technology, and they were looking after approximately 1,000 systems. So about one system per person. There were plenty of engineering practice standards around, but they were all scattered all over the place. They had about 10 domains or departments, and each of them had their own standards. And they were using engineering leads and engineering managers to kind of convey those standards to the actual software delivery teams. Now, the challenge was that my manager came in and he said to me, look, Barbara, would you be able to please write down 4 organization-wide standards for engineering practices that apply to microservices, and can you do that with your team in the next quarter? And can you make sure that those standards are agreed with across the 1,000 people, that some of the teams that your engineering leads are working with have already adopted those standards, and each standard shall come with a fully automated report that clearly shows which systems are adhering to it and which ones are not, and who owns them. So that was a really big challenge, given that my engineering leads spent their days, their full-time job was to look after the teams, to work with 2 teams at a time and help them with their day-to-day software development. So they had a few hours a week where they could help Barbara with her lofty goals. So that was a big challenge, and I had a great team though, but we had to do some acrobatics to get that done. Nope. Great. Conflict resolution. That's another thing engineering managers do a lot of. So there's, of course, the typical interpersonal type conflicts, right? So you have an engineering lead. He or she says something that offends a developer in their team. You are the manager of the engineering lead, so you get brought in to mediate and try and help solve the conflict. There's another type of conflict you encounter, though, as an engineering manager, and that's sort of conflicts around the technical direction that you're trying to set. So an example might be us engineering managers, we came up with some standards for source control, and there was one of the rules that said something like, you cannot merge your code to master unless an automatic build has succeeded. Now, there were a few people upset about this, and one person in particular was really frustrated. It was a real moment like that. And I had to go and speak to him. And he said, this standard is not very well thought through. This is causing my team so much rework, so much more work. We've got all these repositories, and they only contain documentation and tests. And it's completely unreasonable to ask us to have build pipelines attached to that. And there's no point to that anyway. So from his point of view, that was completely correct. What silly thing to ask, a build pipeline for a documentation repository. But from the organizational point of view, we were working at a bank. A bank has several internal and external audits every single year. We cannot simply trust 1,000 people that they always do the right thing and don't sneak malicious code into their documentation repositories. We needed an automated, quick and reliable way to provide proof to said auditors that malicious code can't enter the system. So a classical example of a situation where you don't need to have a cat fight. You can just explain the context, and then people usually come along on the journey. Stakeholder management. That's another thing engineering managers do a lot, and it's pretty much like that. I might cut this one a little bit short, ask me later if you're interested about the story, but effectively, stakeholders want to move into all kinds of directions, and you have to try and coordinate it and find some common ground, and bring everybody back together. And lastly, this is my personal favorite, Inspire and motivate your team to follow you on some journey to achieve some lofty goals, and try to turn all of the individual deliveries into one synchronized, coordinated performance. So I did all that, and then the dilemma arrived. I had an amazing manager. I found him inspiring, I trusted him, he believed in me. I had fabulous colleagues. We were having fun at times. I was hitting my goals. I got positive feedback. You're doing great, Barbara. Everything is wonderful. And I felt loyalty and connection to my team, and I didn't want to disappoint. On the other hand, I had that little voice in my head that kept asking me, wouldn't you be better off being an engineer? Do you remember how much time you had designing and building microservices? Is this really you? You're good at it, but you remember you can be good at something that isn't really you. So are you a manager or are you an engineer? So a type of professional identity crisis emerged. The first thing I thought to do about that is to speak to some of my peers who had also progressed from engineer to manager. And I was absolutely certain I'm the only one who feels like this. Everyone else seemed perfectly comfortable and happy in their managerial roles. It must just be me. There's a term for that. Social psychologists call this pluralistic ignorance. And it's exactly that. You think everybody else thinks something else from you, when in fact they don't. So once I started speaking to my peers, it emerged lots of them were feeling the same. That then provided me with some comfort because I didn't feel so alone anymore, but it still didn't help me to figure out what to do next. So next, I decided to join a mentorship program that I had seen advertised on LinkedIn. I was selected as a mentee, and in that program, I met two fabulously inspiring technical leaders. One of them was Anna. She was assigned to me as a mentor, and she helped me make a plan, an action plan of how to proceed in the direction that I chose. And she stayed alongside me, supporting me through all the stages. And the other technical inspiring leader that I met was a mentor for somebody else. And she is in the room today. And in fact, it's Rachel. Thank you, Rachel. So what Rachel did is she asked me, have you heard about the engineer manager pendulum, Barbara? And I said no. So she flicked me the article. Charity Major wrote it in 2017. So I went and had a read. And I went, oh my God, this is exactly what I had been experiencing. An engineer successful in their career is getting a bit bored or just curious, becomes a manager, a whole new set of skills. It feels really hard. It's like a new job. It's a completely different job. But then wait, some of these people actually pendulum back. They become engineers again. And guess what? They are so much better now at being an engineer because they have been a manager before. So they now know what their manager needs for them, what they are looking for. And they're so much more effective in their role because they know what their boss needs, and vice versa. So there are some people who then pendulum back. They become managers again. And the same is true. So because they have recently refreshed technical skills, they are much better at their strategic planning activities because they know they're more in touch with what has happened, what's going on. We all know how quickly tech moves these days, especially with AI. So this is actually, it struck me as a way to get better at both jobs. So this wasn't about resigning or quitting or stepping down the ladder again. This was about getting better at both sides of the role. So this was enough encouragement for me. I was going to give this a try. So I applied for a role as a principal engineer, and I didn't really think I would get it. But I did. I got hired to a lovely company called Tākina. There's a lot of them here, sitting here today. And I expected to become somewhat of an engineer again. I would learn PHP and work with the different teams and be practical, right? It turned out a different mission. So instead, the mission was use your technical skills to work closely with the 10 software delivery teams. Find out what their key pain points are, structure them, organize them into a roadmap, and try and market that to the technical leadership team, and then help the organization improve their practices. So it was a technical leadership role again. I had a déjà vu, but it wasn't the same one that I had before. So I realized it's not just a pendulum. You don't have to swing back all the way. Instead, it's a continuum. There's roles in between on the entire scale. So that was a huge revelation and a huge aha moment for me. I tried to put this into a slide. This is basically a technical skills scale. So you can see on the left, typical developer skills. There's only some of them, of course, as we all know. On the right, typical manager skills. And in the middle, the ones that you really should have to be good at both. And the attempt to indicate that you could be high or low on these different skills. Personally, I think this is actually not quite correct. It's a multi-dimensional scale. So if you imagine an axis for each skill, and you could be scoring high, medium, or low on that, and then all the other skills are the same. And then the combination of all of those axes, that's your individual skill set. Right, so at this point in time, I thought some people must have fallen asleep. So I thought I'd put this fella on my slide to wake you right up again, because he is, well, polarizing, let's say. So tip number one, for you to try out if you are also feeling a little bit stuck or wondering where to go next in your career. It's all about you. What do you want? And I really mean you. I don't mean your family. I don't mean your manager or the people who report to you, possibly. I don't mean what they need. I don't mean what your neighbor wants you to do. It's about you. What do you want to do? And it did take a little while for me to discover that. And what really helped were 3 questions that I kept asking myself. The first one is, what makes you feel good at work? What makes you feel elated? And I started writing a journal about that. So every evening I sat down and I wrote down what I really enjoyed that day, if there was anything at all. And this can be completely different for every person, right? It could be that you have fixed the most trickiest, most dangerous production problem that day. So you are a little bit the hero, the white knight on the horse. It could be that. Or it could be that you gave a presentation to your team or to your domain, and someone who's usually a little bit quieter comes to you afterwards and said, I really liked what you said. I could really relate to that. Or it could be that you had written a submission for a company prize for one of your employees, and they actually won the prize. So they are getting now rewarded for the good work that they've done. Anything like that, completely individual. But if you start keeping a log or a diary, in the end I moved to weekly, so the frequency doesn't matter, you see a pattern emerge, what satisfies you at work. The next question is, what are you good at? So that's a completely different thing. So my manager at the time encouraged me to do a strength test, and oh my God, that changed my world. All of a sudden, I understood why some things at work come so easily to you, and other things feel like the worst chore in the world. And guess what? It's got to do with your strength. So that's something you could look into. And lastly, what are you optimizing for? So at this particular point in your career, what are you optimizing for? Is it status? Do you want to be in a position in your organization where you can directly influence the direction that company is taking and the decisions that are made? One option. Or do you want to optimize for money? Do you want to earn the most money you can? Common misconception here is that managers always earn more money than principal engineers. May or may not be true, so be careful there. Or thirdly, third option, do you maybe at this point in your career want to optimize for flexibility? You might have a young family and you want to spend a bit more time with your kids. Or you might have earned heaps of money and it's time for you to move on, have a bit more freedom and spend some time on the things that you enjoy doing outside of work. Next tip is roles are more fluid than you think. So this is my example with the principal engineer roles. When you work for one organization for a while, your horizon starts to limit a little bit or become narrow. You think the particular organizational structure that you see is all there is. These are all the roles there are, and I have to navigate myself within that. That is not true. There's roles out there, I promise you, you won't even have heard about. There's probably a different role for every centimeter on that skills continuum. You just have to go out and find it. Next tip, experiment and learn. So this is kind of heading towards the growth mindset. What is it that you are interested in at this point in time, interested in learning? And if you put all your energies and all your focus on that, you will achieve that. There's absolutely no doubt about that. For some people, the career ladder really works, and that is great, right? But if it doesn't work for you, go broad. Try something else. Try something sideways or in different directions. Treat your career as if it was a POC, a proof of concept at work, where you have a hypothesis, this or that, what could possibly interest me. You give it a time frame, so it's time bound, and then you just go and experiment. And if it doesn't work out, there's no such thing as failure. I strongly believe in that, by the way. There's no such thing as failure. There's only learning. You know, okay, it wasn't that. That's fine. Let's try something else. And lastly, here's my unicorn. I'll talk a little bit about the unicorn scale. So this slide is about knowing your own worth. And that's the hardest one, probably. In my experience, I found that people who are good at skills on the managerial skill set and the leadership skill set side, as well as the technical side, they are a little bit rare. They are on the unicorn scale, and they are really highly in demand. So if you can do a bit of both, that is really the unicorn recipe, in my opinion. Unfortunately, the same type of person, and probably most persons in IT really, tend to have a little bit of imposter syndrome. So they can't really see their own magic. So how do you overcome that? Mentors really worked for me. They are a little bit hard to come by because they're usually successful people and therefore quite busy. Another concept that works really well, I think, is the idea of the personal board of trustees. Now, what is that? The personal board of trustees is basically a group of people that you choose and you aggregate around you. And they could be anyone from a really close friend to a family member, someone who trusts you and who you trust, someone who hears all your stories. You know, when you come home and you had a really good day, they hear those stories. Or if you come home and it was an absolute disaster, they'll hear those stories too. So use your board of trustees to navigate your career and, you know, experiment and get their feedback. Because feedback is a really interesting thing. Your manager at work may give you good feedback. My one did. But you have to take that with a little bit of grain of salt because managers tend to have their own agendas. They probably need you to do that role so that they can achieve their own goals. So they are obviously typically honest, but they don't go outside that, is it actually right for Barbara kind of sphere. Your personal board of trustees will. Okay, so in summary, here are my 4 tips. I hope they might help some of you find the next career step that is right for you and help you jump into action. And I just want to finish on this quote by Martin Luther King. You don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step. Thank you.